So you know what is interesting? Do you guys listen to the podcast The Rest is History?
I do.
Okay. I see Rabbi.
I love that podcast.
Yeah. Did you listen to the one they just did about the Rolling Stones?
Honestly, I skipped that little. It was 2 parts,
Yeah.
right? I skipped it. Yeah.
I skip them sometimes too,
Was it
but I
good?
listened to that one. It's really interesting. One of the most interesting things was that apparently Mick Jagger's a genius.
Really?
Yeah.
When you say genius, you mean like a real genius? Like,
So
he understands calculus and physics?
So apparently in England, at some point in like late middle school, early high school, they have a national test, and some very small percentage of the students get to essentially take classes at the London School of Economics, along with their high school class or skip grades or whatever. And Mick Jagger was like qualified for that. So
wow. I'm sure I would have qualified if I lived in England.
Absolutely.
Oh, I thought you were going the other way. I thought you said you would be qualified to be the lead singer of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
I thought that was where you were going with it.
That too.
Now that guy is still. I mean, you seen him at the
it's weird.
the Oscars.
I know.
He's like a kid.
I know.
You mean the guy's in the mid-80s and he's still jumping around?
He's in his
mid-80s. Mid-80s. I mean, they've been doing this for 60 years. Think about it, 60 years.
I have to be honest, it's a little gross by now.
I remember when I was in high school was when, I think high school, it was the Voodoo Lounge tour. It was either Voodoo Lounge or Steel Wheels. It was one of the two. And I remember people saying, "Oh, we got to go see the Stones because this is going to be their last tour."
It's over.
That was 2 decades ago.
I mean, you gotta give them credit for this.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
yes.
Like talking about Rolling Stones and great geniuses.
There's a good transition. So we are going to start a new series, and that series is going to be around the books of the Old Testament that are not part of the Torah or the 5 books of Moses, because probably a lot of Jews have read or at least know about the first 5 books, but I would assume that from there the understanding probably drops off quite a bit. And so what we're going to do is we're not going to do, a line by line kind of thing, but in each episode, we're going to take a book and we'll go in order and talk about it and just sort of hit on what happens, the key points, the themes, why it's important, yada, 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 and go from there. So
great.
Yeah. So the first book after the book of Moses, but the books of Moses, is the book of Joshua. So ChayaLeah, do you want to start off with, I know not all of the books of the Old Testament are necessarily have to be read in order, but book of Joshua and the first few, it's helpful to understand where we left off. So do you just want to do a quick summary of where the Israelites left off at the end of Deuteronomy before Joshua?
Sure. Oh, I was going to start in Genesis at the creation of the world, and then it went.
We'll be back.
Yes.
Yeah, you do that. Me and Josh will take a little breather, and we'll be back in half an hour.
No, I'm just kidding. So, I mean, the Torah, which encompasses the 5 books of Moses and the prophets and the writings, which we call the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, however you want to refer to it, ends. The first 5 books ends with the death of Moses, who is obviously the greatest Jewish leader that we've ever had, communicated with God face to face, as it says, and he has led the Jews out of Egypt into the desert, brought the Torah down to the Jewish people, taught the Torah to the Jewish people, and has led them to the border part of the land of Israel, but has not entered the land yet, as they have not conquered the land. That's what we're going to read about in the book of Joshua. And at the end of the 5 books of Moses, the Jewish people mourn his death. And we go right into the book of Joshua opens with Joshua taking over the leadership of the Jewish people. And there's an interesting question here about why Joshua, I think. I mean, because it could have easily been, one of Moses' sons, perhaps, or some other leader, but there was something special about Joshua. And it's already written in the 5 books of Moses that Joshua is going to be the leader after Moses dies, right?
Correct.
It mentions it already in Deuteronomy. So we can start there and just maybe talk a little bit about who Joshua was. And then we'll get into how the Jewish people entered the land and fought the wars and divided the land, and then the eventual death of Joshua. So let's start with that.
Okay. So we'll start with that question. Why Joshua?
Yeah.
Why Joshua? So it tells us in the book of Exodus that for some reason, and it doesn't go into great details, Joshua sort of became Moses' chief of staff.
Right.
Meaning that Joshua, came there, he served Moses, he was with him in his tent. When people would come ask questions, Joshua was there. When people left, Joshua would clean up the tent, make sure it's ready for tomorrow's, business at hand. So he was already very close to Moses as soon as we encounter him. When Moses went up to the mountain the first time to receive the 10 Commandments, Joshua set up his tent at the base of the mountain. Everybody else was away. Joshua did that. He set up his tent at the base of the mountain. And when Moses came down, him and Joshua had the first discussion, what's going on, and this. And then they went into the camp. They saw the devastation with the golden calf. And that was that. So Joshua always seemed to be Moses' second in command. Aaron, Moses' brother, had a different role. He was the high priest. So he had his vocation was something very different. But as far as leading the Jewish people and bringing the Torah to the Jewish people, it was Moses and then Joshua right behind him. Moses, at the end of his life, comes to God and says, okay, you know what? Aaron's passing away and you gave the leadership to his son. I want the same thing. I have two sons and I'm not going into the land of Israel. I think that usually he doesn't ask it explicitly, but it's inferred from his words that he tells God, look, you got to appoint somebody to do this. So inferring that maybe one of my sons can take over. God says no. God says there's a verse in Proverbs which basically goes, he who tends the tree eats the fruit, meaning that the ones that worked hard and with you and was with you and cared for you and worried about you and served you, he's the one that's going to take over the leadership. Your two sons, they lived off your reputation. They took it easy. They did whatever they did, but they were not really involved. They're out. Joshua is the one that I want to be leading the Jewish people when they go into the land of Israel. He saw your struggles. He saw your successes. He was with you all the way, and he's a trustworthy person. He was one of the 12 spies that went into the land of Israel, came back with a good report that we could defeat the Canaanites. We should go in. He wasn't like the other 10 that, they discouraged the Jewish people from doing that. So God saw in him a very special trait of leadership. And that's why Joshua was chosen instead of Moses' children. And when Moses passes away, this is where the book of Joshua starts. And and the first chapter is very interesting because over and over God is revealing himself to Joshua, just like he did to Moses. Now, even though that he will not have the same relationship that Moses had, because like no one has this relationship with God ever again, even in the way they communicated, but he does communicate to Joshua. And he tells Joshua over and over again, Chazak ve'ematz. You have to be strong. And you have to be courageous. This is the number one quality that you are going to need. It's not going to be brains. It's not going to be overly brilliant. It's not going to be, the greatest teacher ever. What you're going to need right now is going to be courage. And courage is you have to always remember that I'm going to be with you, even in tough times, because primarily what all he's going to do right now is going to fight wars. Because his job, unlike Moses, was leading the Jews in the desert. Of course, Moses fought a few wars, but he was going to fight constantly to actually capture land, establish civilizations, etc., etc., etc. So this is a very interesting idea that, when you ascend to a position of leadership, the key critical area is going to be courage, to do the right thing, even when it doesn't seem right, even when you don't see victory at hand. Remember that I am with you, that I'm going to be the one that's going to be doing the fighting for you. You have to always remember that, and don't be afraid. because in battle, what happens? People are going to die, and Jews are going to die, and that causes a tremendous amount of second guessing. Should I have? Shouldn't I have? Don't do that. You just keep moving forward. Chazak ve'ematz. Be strong. Let your heart be strong. Now, for most people, when God says that, and we say it to ourselves, it lasts for 10 minutes. You get courage, and then you go back to your old feeble self, right. Meek self. But here he was telling him, this is a lifelong endeavor. You have to do this, and always keep remembering that I am at your side. Even when you don't see me, I'm still there with you. And don't worry, I'm going to help you through this.
I found reading through since I read it over the last week, I read the whole book, which is not it's not a long book.
24 chapters.
It's an
but
easy,
short chapters.
It's a pretty easy read. And I have to be honest, like I learned the book of Joshua in 4th grade. And all I remember is it being boring, right? And so, because as a kid, you learn the battles or whatever. Reading it again as an adult was so interesting, and mainly, and I wrote it in my book here, because of those words, be strong and courageous. How many times it's mentioned over and over again in different forms and different ways of using the words throughout the 24 chapters. And I just couldn't help thinking about our current moment right now that the Jewish people find themselves in, and thinking about how it's so comforting. I felt so personally comforted reading through this. And what was interesting to me, and I want to ask Jay and both of you, like one of the interesting things that I found in the book is the number of times that Joshua talks about how the Jewish people need to stay close to the Torah. He's like, you need to keep the Torah close to you. You need to follow the rules. You need to follow, and it's like it's not an underlying idea. It's the central idea that Joshua keeps, sort of pressing upon the Jewish people, and the relationship between Hashem and the Jews and the Torah. It's like, I don't know, it's in a way more explicit in this book than it is even in the 5 books of Moses, that triangular or whatever you would say relationship. Am I right?
I think in a way you bring a point that in the 5 books of Moses, the Jewish people are being cultivated and educated. This is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to be done. This is when we get there. Now it's practice, sort of. In the desert, we weren't living a real life. I mean, don't forget, all our food was prepared for us. The man was coming down. Our clothes was automatically cleansed. We didn't have to worry about the beating sun, the hot sun. We had the cloud of glory over us. We had a well of cold water. Yeah, everything was done for us. We were kind of in training of what was going to happen when we get into the land of Israel. And during those 40 years, Moses was trying to impart a sense of faith to the Jewish people that, hey, listen, I'm telling you something. Things are going to be different when you cross the Jordan, because I'm not going to be around, and neither is the man, neither is the well, and our relationship is going to change. And you're going to have to remember that our existence is totally dependent upon our relationship with the Almighty. If it's strong, we will be successful. If it's weak, we will fail. And now Joshua has to implement that in real time, like in real time. It's like it's one thing. It's like practice, and then all of a sudden Sunday morning you're kicking off and you're playing the game. So all the practice from Monday to through Friday is one thing. But now you have to execute. That's where the difficulty comes in. And then you see in the book itself, the successes and then the failures of what goes on. And it's all connected to this very same idea that our destiny is completely dependent upon our relationship and our servitude to the Almighty. If we're good, we're good. And that's the problem today. Today is we don't feel it. We don't feel it. I mean, you ask people, do you feel this close connection to God, that you feel that every day he's worried about you and he cares for you and he wants to do the best for you? And if only you follow these set of rules, then everything is going to be okay. most people will say, I don't feel it.
it,
Every once in a while, sure, at the birth of a child or at a tragedy or some other miraculous thing, you'll feel, or Yom Kippur at Shul by the Shore, you'll feel this tremendous sense of spirituality and of connection to the Almighty, but overall on a daily basis, it takes a lot of work, to feel that way. I mean, it takes meditation to think about it and then to implement it and to say that, even when we're drowning, that, I still believe and have faith that God is somewhere, somehow is going to come through for me. Mm-hmm. That's not easy.
And it doesn't,
that's the job.
And it doesn't even take that long for that to happen, because immediately after they conquer Jericho,
I mean,
right? God commands them to not keep the spoils for themselves, and immediately after they start keeping the spoils for themselves. So it didn't take very long for them to get that.
I mean, here, because in a way it's a real life struggle.
Yeah.
We see in Joshua and the people, this is a real life struggle. I mean, you come into a town, you vanquish it, they all leave. I mean, all the spoils are there. I mean, think about it. I mean, we're attacking Kentucky, for example, and we go into Fort Knox, and there's no one there to protect it. There's all these bullions of gold, and you say, don't touch it. But if you just took one of them, just one bullion, you'll be set for life. Your children will be able to afford homes. Your grandchildren will go to the best schools. And who's going to care? There's thousands of these bullions. Mm-hmm. Someone's going to care for, even what Achan takes in Ai.
Right.
There's some going a little bits and pieces of here and all of that. Compared to what was in Ai, it was nothing. It was nothing. But because he forgot that our relationship with God is foremost, and he said, "Don't take it," and he lost himself. The punishment didn't come only on him. The punishment came because we lost soldiers, and Joshua couldn't understand why. Yep. But before we jump to the battles, I think the one interesting part is chapter number 2, where Joshua decides before going to Jericho to send in the spies.
Yes.
Now, this is interesting in the sense because his predecessor, Moses, did that and it backfired.
Terrible, right.
I mean, it failed miserably. I mean, terribly. And you would think to yourself, I mean, God just told him, listen, I'm going to be with you. You don't have anything to worry about. Chazak v'ematz, just be strong. I'll give you the orders, whatever I tell you to do. Walk around the city, blow the shofar, even though it doesn't make any sense how blowing the shofar is going to bring down the walls. That doesn't matter. Don't overthink this. Just follow what I'm telling you to do. But Joshua still insists on sending 2 spies over, and of course they turn out to be righteous, and they come back with a great report. Don't worry, the city their hearts are melted. They're terrified of us. All we got to do is just march in there. They're gonna give up. But why he does it, I believe, is that Joshua realizes that after the 40 years, all the people that came out of Egypt, they weren't really ready to go into the land of Israel. Yeah. I mean, they came with a slave mentality. A slave mentality going into building a civilization just doesn't work. We needed to have that kind of transitional period where the old generation passes away, and even in a sense for leadership, where Moses was still so connected to Egypt. He was born, he was an Egyptian. His generation were Egyptians. You needed a fresh start. And Joshua was that fresh start, knowing that the people that he sent didn't have the hangups of the former spies. They already were, part of this generation, the Chalutzim. They were part of this generation that were pioneers, and he picked 2. He didn't pick 12. He just picked 2. And he told them, you better come back. I don't care. I'm going to shoot you if you don't come back with a good report. I don't care. It made people feel better. And it certainly, gave them courage to know that, hey, the war is already won. Mm-hmm. I mean, like a great general once said, victory already was attained before the first shot was fired. Yeah. You know that. I mean, because the wars are fought before the war. I mean, all you need to do is just Poland and Germany in 1939. I mean, September 1st was when the war started, but the war really was over in August 31st when they decided to battle. I mean, the 30 days it took them to clean it up. And this was the situation there. So he sends in the 2 spies, and they come to this house, and we know the story. They stay there, and Rahab, protects them, and she becomes a heroine. I mean, here this woman that runs a house of ill repute, which is another incredible lesson that you never could judge anybody.
Yes.
I mean, here's this woman that's been making money off this this immoral business. And she herself may have been a prostitute. There's different opinions about that, and yet she becomes the heroine.
Yeah.
She hides them, and she saves them, and later on, she joins the people. She becomes a Jewish woman and has children and great.
And on that, so I was going to ask about the relevance of her being a prostitute. But the other thing that was interesting about that story was that they tell her to put a rope outside of the crimson rope outside of her house to protect her house from the destruction, and that was sort of reminded me of the blood in the doorposts at the 10th plague.
Yep. Exactly. Because they weren't going to be around. I mean, the two spies may have not been in that part of the city,
right?
So you needed to have a sign to protect her,
right?
And, exactly.
So before the battle, I wanted to ask your opinion on the resonance or the importance of this, or what this represents. Joshua's at the river in Jordan, and he sees a man with a sword, and he says, "Who are you?" and asks him if he's one of their enemies, and he responds, "No, I'm captain of God's host."
Correct.
So why does he phrase it like that? Who is it, and what is his significance?
So as we mentioned before, that Joshua's relationship is not going to be the same as Moses'. So here is a reassurance. An angel comes down from heaven. Joshua is worried the night before, even though, Chazak ve'amatz, as much as he can try to strengthen himself, and he's out there by himself, praying and meditating on this idea that, hey, you know what, tomorrow I'm a different person. I mean, till now, it was nice and I was protected by Moses, but now tomorrow I got to start doing this. So God sends down a reassurance now. So he doesn't recognize him. To me, what it means is that, he's not at the level of a Moses yet, that, Moses was kind of like all-knowing, knowing it all and everything. And God sends him a reassurance that, what, look, I'll tell you, all you got to do is, like he says, trust. And this, I am the host. I am the chief warrior. I'm going to do all of the fighting for you. You don't have to do anything. You're not going to have to do. All you're going to have to do is assemble the people and just make sure they follow instructions. That's all that really this matters. And angels have been shown over and over again, even in the Chumash, that God sends angels, like with Jacob in the battle with Esau. He sends Esau's angels to do battle with Jacob, to give Jacob strength. Hey, you know what? Look, I'm afraid of my brother, but if I could take this angel, hey, you know what? It's not so bad. And God sends again this angel, not to do battle with Joshua, but to reassure him. Tell him, don't worry, about tomorrow. I'm going to be there with you. I'm going to do the fighting for you. And that's what Joshua needs at that time, is encouragement, because he's not Moses.
Yeah.
He's not Moses. He eventually will rise up, but early on you have to make your own mark, and that's not so easy, even for someone as talented and as courageous and as faithful as Joshua. Joshua is a faithful servant. He has no doubts. But you still need that assurance, and that's what God sends to him the night before.
Can I ask, maybe a simple question? But did the people living in the land of Israel at the time, there were 31
municipalities,
different kings that
little municipalities
or whatever? Yeah. Did they understand that was the Jewish land, or was this like a surprise to them, or were they there because they knew?
No.
That this was holy and that the Jewish people were going to...
They didn't know that it was holy.
Right.
They knew that this was promised to Abraham. Okay. But you have to understand that they were not Jewish. Right. So, just because God had promised this land to Abraham, this was a Jewish God that promised to Abraham. They had their own gods. Right. And they knew that eventually they're going to have to fight a war. That's why they had Sichon and Og, that they paid off big money to protect the border.
Right.
the reason why the people in Jericho were so astonished and weakened is because they saw their two big heroes being taken down.
Right.
That here we pay all of this ransom money for you to protect us, and nothing. And now we're open to these people who are coming in and claiming this is their land.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I mean, it's almost.
Okay, this is maybe a funny question, but did any of you feel when you were reading about Jericho and like walking around the city walls and the shofar, like I couldn't help but think about the beeper story in Lebanon, and like I know it's not the same exact thing, but if we fail to like recognize God's hand, even in today's world, then I feel like we're missing the whole point of these books to a degree. I mean, not that didn't take military expertise and all of that, but like there is some kind of like miraculous elements even to the world that we live in today. And I take that from these books, that it's not distant. It's close.
But you have to be willing and open-minded for that.
I know.
It's not easy because had we had a beeper attack without the beepers,
right?
You see, if they weren't carrying beepers,
like
and we just exploded them,
right?
Without and we would have said, how did their beepers get exploded? They don't even have beepers. I mean, that would have been something.
I know.
Now you say to yourself, everybody, the people who want to believe this is a miracle, the beepers, is going to believe it.
Right.
But for most people, who got credit? Not God.
Not
God. They would say, well, God timed it so perfectly, blew everybody up. No, who got credit? Mossad.
Right.
I mean, we don't know who the agents are, but if we had known the planners and we know the guy who set up the Bulgarian fake company and the guys who sold them, these are the guys who got credit. Jericho was like an open miracle. I mean, you blew a shofar and the Houthis all of a sudden disappeared.
Right.
You blow a shofar, 10 dead Houthis. You blow another shofar, 100 dead Houthis. You blow a shofar and Tehran blows up. I mean, if that would happen, then it's a little easier. And even then, I think we are so cynical. And here in our lives, we're so skeptical about miracles and about God intervening in our lives that we would say, you know what? Even Jericho is now being questioned. I mean, if you read reports about this, the war in Jericho, I just read recently a paper. There was a strong wind. The sound of the shofar reverberated and shook the walls. The walls weren't that strong. A strong wind came. Boom, the sound barrier, bingo. It took it down. It was no miracle. A miracle of the walls falling.
That's why it's so important to learn Torah, because when you read, I know, I'm just saying for myself, I'm cynical always. I'm the most cynical. But then when I read the book of Joshua and I see how Hashem's hand is directing the Jewish people all throughout history, I can't help but just think for a moment, even like, where is it right now? How is it working right now?
But that's the story. That's
why it's important to learn.
The story with this kid, Bobby Stein. Bobby Stein was a kid in Hebrew school. Terrible kid. I mean, such a troublemaker that, you have those kids in Hebrew schools. You have some nice kids and then some troublemaker kids. So this Bobby Stein was a troublemaker. One day, the rabbi is teaching the story of this, and he asks the class, so who broke the wall of Jericho? And Bobby Stein says, it wasn't me, Rabbi, I promise. The whole class cracks up and then starts laughing. The rabbi is furious again. He grabs Bobby by the shoulders. He's now calling his father. His father is this big attorney, and so he calls the secretary. This is Rabbi Perlmutter, and I want to speak to Mr. Stein. This is an emergency. Something about his son. So in the middle of all, you can imagine a guy is a big attorney in New York. He gets on the phone. Rabbi, what's the emergency? The rabbi said, what, I was in class today and I was teaching the walls of Jericho. And I said, who broke the walls of Jericho? And your son, Bobby, said, it's not me. And Stein says to him, Rabbi, I want to stop you right there. I don't care who broke the wall. Just send me the bill. Whoever did it, I'll pay whether my son did it or not. Okay, I got to go. Click. Okay? All right? So if you want to know about the walls of Jericho and American Jewry, how well versed they are, it doesn't matter to me. I'll pay for the wall. Just, okay? And and unfortunately, that's been the situation for years. That's been really the struggle of the Jewish people. Always trying to connect, this idea of living in a real world with real wants and needs and jealousy and vindictiveness and all of those bad traits, to saying, put that aside. Let's just follow the dictates of Hashem. Let's follow the Torah and do that. And Joshua early on, is faced with that. They win at Jericho, but then they lose the next battle, and he has to then rethink the whole situation. So it's up and down. So it's an incredible book to open up the prophets, because it's real, and we can relate to that, even though the miracles, of course, of Jericho and all of that stuff, of course not. We don't experience that kind, but it's real struggle with real people and real wars, and he doesn't fulfill it. I mean, at the end of the day, Joshua is going to win battles and is going to split part of the land. It's going to take many more years for the Jews to fulfill this mission, but he gets it going. And not only that, but he also early on, he brings the people into the covenant. He makes everybody circumcise themselves. They bring the Pesach sacrifice. So Joshua is not only a military leader, he's also a religious leader, where, because when you come to the people and say, hey, I want everybody to circumcise themselves who wasn't circumcised in the desert, it's a challenge. It's a bit of a challenge. And then reinstating the rituals of the Pesach sacrifice to again reiterate to the Jewish people and to reinforce into their minds that, hey, you know what? You don't understand that there's connection between eating the Pesach sacrifice and winning the next battle. But I'm telling you that this is real. It's absolutely real. That when we go out to battle and we follow the dictates, and you have a mezuzah on your door and you put on tefillin every day and all of these things. And I still remember when during the 67 war, I was a little kid then, 11 years old, and the Rebbe was hammering home this point about tefillin, that make sure everybody puts on tefillin, because tefillin is a sign that the nations of the world are going to fear us. He quoted the Talmud that, that they're going to literally fear us. And people were saying, a Jew in New York is going to put on tefillin and Egypt is going to fall apart. And Rebbe said, yes. And that's how it works. You don't understand. I mean, if you go through Jewish history, that our connection and our victory in battles are going to be connected to the way we do it. And I can't tell you how many people, during that 67 and 68 were so encouraged and so inspired, they began to put on tefillin. Non-religious people, because the Rebbe said this is our destiny. Our destiny is always going to be tied into the Torah and its mitzvahs, and that's all is
you
right
see that here,
in Joshua.
Well, that was when we did the interview with with Tanya White about Rabbi Sachs. She said that the 67 war was a huge turning point for Rabbi Sachs in his life. And that's when he really decided to make his life Judaism. So there's another interesting part here I wanted to ask you about, and this is it seems unique to Joshua, where before the battle with the Amorites, he says to God, stand still, O sun. And he sort of asks God to please make the sun stop. And in Joshua 10:14, it says, neither before nor since has there ever been such a day when God acted on words spoken by someone else.
Correct.
So that I thought that was interesting. It didn't occur to me that God never actually responded to someone else's words, and it was only Joshua that had that influence on him, or that I don't know what the right word is, but
I think someone else besides Moses, because I think we'd have to go back to Moses and his pleading with God all the time, and begging him, pleading with him to forgive the Jewish people, and God finally relents. So there's that kind of a relationship. But here they're doing a battle, and the battle is not won yet. And Joshua doesn't want to go into the night and stop. So he begs God to perform a real miracle and stop the sun, literally, and God acquiesces. And God says, it's a good idea and it's wonderful, and do that. And I think that kind of a relationship really shows a maturity within Joshua, and that he understands that it's not going to be our strength. It's not going to be the weakness of our enemies. It's going to be that our prayers, which he already had experienced before. I mean, it's not new to him, but here was in real time again, this idea that our victory is going to be solely won upon the assurance that God is there with us and is going to make this happen. And he holds up the sun from setting, and they're victorious. One of
the things that I read about that particular story is that what was unique and why it says this was the only time, because there were other times, the Talmud mentions other times that the sun was stilled by God. But what was different is that this was the only time Joshua didn't pray for it to happen. He didn't ask God to make it happen. He just said the words, the sun should stay, stop the sun or whatever. And it happened. And so, and this was, there's a lot of reasons why, and there's a lot of explanations given, but one of the reasons is because the Jewish people needed to see, even in their victory, because they did win that battle, that Hashem controls the world and that Hashem is the one in charge of nature and, all of these things. And so that was what was unique about that one time, that it wasn't a pray. Joshua didn't pray to God in that moment. He wasn't like, please keep the sun still for me. He just said, stop the sun. And it happened. So
I think it's an interesting point Rabbi brings up that I hadn't thought about, is that the other times that people you sort of bargain with God, like Abraham before Sodom and Gomorrah, and when God responds, it's not like a physical manifestation. It's how he responds to a situation. But this was a physical response in the real world of him.
In real, totally.
Interesting. The one of the things that I thought was just an interesting point is that, and I keep going back to this idea of like the Jewish people as a collective, because 2.5 tribes were never going to settle on the other side of the river, of the Jordan River, right? And Joshua tells them that they should leave their wives and children, settle them down, and then they have to come and fight with their brothers and the other tribes in the land. And so it's an interesting idea that they were responsible to fight this war, even though they weren't going to live there. And it just comes back to that idea that we're all responsible one for another. And like, they couldn't just opt out because they weren't going to live on the, western side of the Jordan River. They had to fight in that war. And I think there's something interesting there about like the Jews today in the diaspora and Jews in Israel and how we're responsible for each other.
I mean, it's one of the more interesting parts of it, because after the 7 years battle that they're going to do and capture the land, and now they're going to start a division of the land. The first people that go are Reuben, Manasseh, and Gad go back over the river to go back to their homeland. When Moses was preparing to do the crossing or whatever, sending the Jews across the river, and they had defeated all of these people like Melchaboshan and Sichon, and these 2.5 tribes came to him and they said to him, Miknarav, we have much cattle, we'd like to stay here on this side of the river. We don't want to go to, we want to stay on the eastern side, of the river. And Moses blasts them. I mean, Moses, are you people crazy or something? I mean, we just had 40 years. We were because the people back there didn't want people. Now you're coming to me and you're doing the very same thing and saying, "Oh, we don't want to go into the land of Israel and all of that stuff." So no, the answer is like, read my lips. No more taxes, right? I mean, read my lips. No, do you understand? No, low, whatever the word is, in Aramaic, no. And the 2 tribes, the 2 tribes figured, let's take a different tactic. We'll say, look, I get it that, but the land really is good here, and we'll go fight. I mean, if that's what you need us to do, we're going to go fight, but we'll lead the battles. I mean, the tribe of God was this ferocious warrior type of tribe that Moses blesses them with with one swing of the sword, you take off the arm and their head to get very, very strong and courageous soldiers. They said, not only will we do that, we'll stay there the entire battle and we'll lead the battle. If that's what's going to be. And then Moses says, okay, if you're going to agree to do that and stay with us, then your children and wives, and you can build cities of, fortification here on this land, and you come with us and fight. So is
that land part of biblical Israel? Like, do we consider that?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Of course. it's a land that was captured by us and taken by us. So it's definitely part of it.
Which is on another point too. Now, I'm not a geography scholar. However, I'm fairly certain that Egypt is west of Israel, but they came across the Jordan from the east. So they probably could have used a map. Would have been helpful.
Well, you know what the Golda Meir once said about him, about Moses. He was a great leader, but a terrible map reader. You know, there was easier ways. I mean, you know, the Israeli army, when we're talking about the 67 war, in 2.5 days they went from the border of Israel, which was before the Sinai in Gaza, and through Gaza, through the Sinai desert, to the Suez Canal in 2.5 days.
Right.
You know, it took us 40 years to do that. Now, there are quicker ways to get from Egypt to Israel, but this was the problem. The problem was God, early on in Exodus, tells us that he didn't want to take them the short route because lest they see a battle, because it was a battle fought with the Philistines, and, you know, there were bodies along the way. The people would see it, freak out. So he made them took the circuitous route through the south, you know, of the Sinai desert, around all of these little countries like Edom and Moab, you know, and the Seir, all of these things that he circumvented. He didn't want to fight with them, and he said, I don't want to go to war with these people. But when it came to Sichon and Og, that were on the border of the Jordan, he said, no, these people you can fight with, but the other ones like Moab and Ammon, now is not the time to deal with them. We'll deal with them later on. We fight wars with them later, but right now, don't harass them. You know, let's keep moving, and let's not do bad with them. So they did go a few extra miles, or a few extra 100 miles, you know, around them, and then cut through and crossed the Jordan, you know, through the paths of Arava, which was called over there the Valley of Arava, and they fought. That's why they ended up.
People should just know the Jordan River is not big.
The Jordan River is
it's not like a river that you imagine here in the United States.
It's a creek.
It's a creek. Yeah.
You know, there are parts of it which is a river, but there are parts which, like, well, I mean, you could jump across. You could jump across the Jordan River.
Yes.
I mean, almost. I mean, there's parts that are just they're stony, and a little water is flowing through it.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly.
So, you know.
So let me ask you this. So I have two more things I wanted to ask you about. One is there's a guy mentioned in the story, Balaam, and the reason that stuck out to me is because, so I know in the Talmud there are some choice words for him, and one of the things I've seen these like online idiots do is when the Talmud speaks badly about him, they say, well, they're actually talking about Jesus. I don't know if have you seen that?
No.
Okay. So,
you stumped that.
Yeah. So the only reason that it stuck out to me is because I've seen that argument made about replace it, that when they say Balaam, they're actually talking about Jesus, and Balaam happens to come up.
But isn't that in the Torah?
Well, what's the connection there?
I have no idea. But
right.
But what is this? May not be an important. If it's not an important part of the story, we can just skip over it. But
you're talking about Balaam, the false prophet, or the prophet?
Let me see. It's in. Let me look it up. Hold on a second.
I don't know.
Yeah, if it's not coming to mind, it's probably not all that important. So we can.
I'm the Rabbi. Good.
No, I mean,
but yeah. Anyway, we can skip over it. It's not that important. So all right, here's probably a more important question. So in chapter 20, they set up this area called the City of Refuge.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Could you talk about that and the relevance of that area?
Oh, that's a good one.
Okay. So Moses, while they were still in the desert, commanded the Jewish people such: there's going to be times when we're going to establish a civilization and someone is going to kill someone inadvertently without premeditation. There was no forethought. There was no animus. There was no ambush. But just unfortunately, a terrible situation happened where one inadvertently, unwittingly, killed someone else. Okay, what are we going to do with this person? So Moses says we're going to set up what we call cities of refuge, Ari Miklat. And the person that did the killing has to go to that city and stay in that city until the death of the high priest. Okay, so there are in the Talmud a lot of discussion about this. They had established 9 cities of refuge throughout six that were in Israel, and then there was 3. No, they established 6, and 3 are going to be eventually 3 more when this says when Mashiach comes. So there's 3 in Israel, 3 over the land in the eastern part of the Jordan where Reuven and Manasseh and God lived. The purpose of the city was to take in and to protect this, we can't call him a murderer, but this killer. And the killer stays there until the high priest in Jerusalem passes away. Once the high priest passes away, then he can go back home and do all of these things. Until he goes to that, he's open prey. Meaning that, if you killed somebody and the family was hot-blooded and they wanted to take revenge, there was a Goyal Hadam, there was someone who could take revenge upon him. He was not allowed to touch him. The Goyal Hadam was not allowed to touch this guy, the avenger, because he had to first come to court. And when he came to court and the judges then adjudicated the case and they ruled, yes, he is liable for the death of this person, and his punishment is going to be that he has to go and live in the city of refuge. Then he was escorted. The Goyal Adam, the person in the family, could not do anything to him, and he went to the city of refuge, and he stayed there. If during the lifetime of the high priest he left the city of refuge, then he was open. It was open season on him. Then if the family came and took revenge, there was no punishment for the family, because then he takes his life in his hands. And that was kind of the idea of the city of refuge.
And when the high priest died, everybody was able to leave that city and go home. And you weren't able to
touch
take
them.
revenge. Okay.
I mean, they were innocent.
Right.
Now, I wouldn't say innocent, but they served their time.
Yeah.
They served their time, and they went, and they went home. And
it's interesting.
And so it gave an opportunity, because you would think to yourself, why if I killed someone inadvertently, when I was standing on a painting and a building and I kicked the can down and it landed on someone's head, why would I be responsible to go? So the commentaries and philosophers and Hasidus explain that, maybe somewhere in the past you've done something, or, there's a different Gilgal, another incarnation, you did something that you were responsible, the famous story is that, like the one that was killed was really a murderer, and he was not an innocent person. He was really a murderer, and he deserved the death penalty, but the courts couldn't kill him for whatever reason. So now he gets the can of paint on his head. He's killed, and this guy who was supposed to also be punished somewhere else, he ends up, going. So everything works out kind of perfectly, like in a perfect world.
Justice is served.
Justice is served always. But that was the things, and one of the things was, I think the family used to bring goods to the mother of the high priest to show them that they have no ill will, because the family of the person sitting in the Ari Miklat would pray every day for the death of the high priest.
Right.
They want their father back. So please, God, please kill the high priest today. Let him get cancer. Let him have a heart attack. So something, anything. So they would bring gifts to the mother of the high priest to show her that they have nothing. They want to live a life. And they, even though that they themselves are suffering because their father or whoever is, living in the Ari Miklat, in the city of refuge. So it was a good way of punishing, of telling people. Now, not anybody that did it. It had to be sort of, I guess in America you have where there's premeditated murder, there's manslaughter, there's involuntary manslaughter. If there was a case where it was impossible for him to be careful, I mean, whatever the circumstances were, then the city of refuge was not applicable. It was only in a case where he should have been more careful. It was not involuntary. I mean, I'm not sure again in the legal terms. It was not, but it was manslaughter, meaning you drove. And you drove at 120, speed, then you're going to the city of refuge. If you drove things and someone just ran out in front of you where you had you were following the law, you did everything correctly, it was just, you may not have to go. This is why it was adjudicated. As soon as it happened, the courts would send out police to protect him, because, so no one would harm this guy, bring him to court, and then adjudicate if the city of refuge is really something that would help, or city of refuge is something that wouldn't help. But like, for example, it would not help if you killed him intently, but no one saw.
Right.
Like that wouldn't help you, the city of refuge. Because courts couldn't do anything to you because there were no witnesses.
Right.
City of refuge wouldn't take you because it wasn't inadvertent. It was with malice.
Yeah.
So therefore, it was those cases, where what had to follow this very specific rules and regulations. Who the city would take in.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So in the book, I have one final question, and then I don't know if you have another question. But in the book of Joshua, so they fight battles for 7 years, and they defeat all these different kings and cities, and they capture them, and then Joshua spends another 7 years dividing up the land, and it goes into great detail in the book about which tribe gets what, and they just and the Torah actually describes the borders and the cities that are included in every single tribe's land and where they belonged, etc. And so one of the questions I had, and I'm sure the answer is a simple answer, but it's interesting that Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, they get a piece of land, each of them. In fact, Manasseh gets 2 pieces because his tribe is split on either side of the Jordan River, and then Ephraim gets a big section of land, and the Levites get none because they're going to serve in the temple, and so they get different cities. And then another thing I thought was interesting is that Hebron, the city of Hebron, is specifically given to Caleb, which is interesting. But why did Joseph get 2 portions of land when none of the other grandchildren of Jacob are given?
So this is answered. This is answered in the book of Genesis. When Jacob needs a favor of Joseph, he doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. He calls Joseph and he says, "I want you to bury me in Israel. I want you to swear, and your 2 sons." Manasseh and Ephraim, they're going to be like my sons. You have to have 12 tribes. So there's going to be 12 tribes. Levi's out. So even like marching in the desert, you needed a formation of 12. You couldn't have, the Levites were out because they carried the ark and they carried everything. So Levi was out. And instead of Levi, he busted up Joseph.
Right.
So Joseph, and when actually it's his tribe, he comes from Ephraim, Joshua.
Right.
Joshua's an Ephraimite. So, so that's when it started. That there's going to be 12 tribes, but Ephraim and Manasseh will be separated. Then he tells Joseph, any other kids that you have are not included in this deal. It's only these 2, Ephraim and Manasseh. And that's why they get the land that they get. It's split beforehand. Jacob does that. The land itself, how it was split, was already formulated by Moses. Moses told Joshua how we should split the land up. And when they capture the land, there should be a certain, there's a gorel, there's a lottery. You take certain portions. To the bigger tribe, you give a bigger piece of land. To the small tribe, a smaller piece of land. But you do it, but the lottery means really by the hand of God. So when you pick up a piece of land, okay, let's say then this Zvulun gets the seashore. Okay, but we already knew that Moses already blessed Zvulun with being, seafarers. So it worked out both ways. And who got land also was a bit complicated because the people that left Egypt, they were promised the land.
Right.
I mean, these are people that were told, I'm going to bring you to the land of Israel, but they weren't in the land of Israel. So you had to go back a generation and give and include the grandparents also, and then split it up among the children. So let's say the Perlmutter clan, if it was, let's say, my father got out of Egypt, I got into Israel, and I had 4 sons. So my father, and then I had a brother. So my father would get a portion, but then his portion would be split between me and my brother, and then that would be included into a different portion with his sons and my sons, and that's how we would split up the land. So it was quite complicated how each family busted up the land because they wanted to include also the generation previous that left Egypt. So
interesting. That is, I think, an important point, is that basically the entire second half of the book is just going into extraordinarily painful detail. about how they're going to divide the land up and who's going to get each portion, and it's
and then he dies.
And then he dies. But it's just unbelievable when you go to Israel and you walk through different cities, and like it's the same names of the cities that are mentioned here, and the different, like even some of the kibbutzim have the same names of the places that are mentioned here in the Bible. I mean, it's just, I love that part. I love when I drive on the highway in Israel and the exits are all like, oh, that was, in the book of Joshua, and that's in the book of this book.
And ChayaLeah, I mean, you had mentioned ChayaLeah, he gets it because of his reward for coming back with his spies.
Right.
And he gave a good report, and he tried to get the people to do the right thing.
Right.
And,
and the Levites get cities also. They get cities,
42 cities they get. And the priesthood doesn't get any cities. Right. It's not clear about the tribe of Shimon. Well, Moses was really not really I'm not a fan of the tribe of Shimon, because what they did to him, challenged him. Yeah. So Shimon ended up getting a portion within Judah, and it was just
Judah definitely gets a good piece. I mean, Judah gets a big chunk.
Well, because ultimately Judah is going to come to David is going to expand the land and take over, the leadership of the land. And we don't really appreciate the tribes themselves, because we keep thinking of one people, but the tribes had a tremendous amount of influence. Because each tribe, had their own Sanhedrin, and each tribe had their own way of doing things. And, I'm sure customs, popped up among the tribes, and then, when you married outside of your tribe, what happened and how a land was transferred, from one part to another part. So it was an interesting way.
I would be remiss not to mention the daughters of Tzalefchad, by the way.
The best.
There was a man named Tzalefchad who had 5 daughters and no sons, and the daughters basically came and said, "This is nonsense that we don't get our father's portion.
Lama Negara, why should we be excluded?
We get it?" And they end up getting their father's portion of land,
right?
And
with one precondition.
What?
So when God, they had to get married, but not only that, when the leaders of Manasseh came, and they were part of the tribe of Manasseh, they said, "Well, 1 second, Moses, you're going to give them a piece of land. They're all going to marry, and then what's going to happen? There's other tribes of Gad and Zvulun and Asher and Ephraim are going to take our land, because once the women pass away, the land gets inherited by the husband and their sons." So they were forced to marry their cousins. They could only marry within the tribe of Manasseh, but that only lasted that generation. Afterwards, their children could marry anybody else, but they were only allowed to marry within their tribe, so not to diminish the land that they were given.
I think it says in the Talmud that the tribe of Asher had the most beautiful women.
That's right.
And everybody wanted to marry the daughters of the tribe of Asher.
Why not?
It's just interesting.
Every group's got their thing.
Yes, every group has their thing. Exactly.
Right. Next book is not going to be as easy as this book.
Yeah,
I know.
So next,
but it's good.
Next book, I think we should really split up into a different category.
Yeah, we could do that.
Because there's so much in the book of Judges, because we go now from a single leader. Moshe Kibbel Torah Sinai. Moses got the Torah from Sinai, Moshe Yeshua. He passed it to Joshua, and Joshua passed it on to the elders.
Right.
There's not going to be a singular leader in the Jewish people for a long time.
Right.
And that's going to cause tremendous hardships among the Jews. And then the tribes are really going to come into play a lot until really the story of Samuel. We're going to have to go all the way to the book of Samuel till we find a united leader, of the Jewish people. So it's going to be interesting.
I do want to say one thing about Joshua that I never really appreciated before, but the idea that he stepped into a leadership role after Moses is so incredible. I mean, what a hero, because that's an intimidating job. Right? Moses was so beloved. Even by God, forget the Jewish people, but Moses is like the standard of what a leader is. And then for someone to step into that role, it must have been really difficult. And, we talk a lot about in pop psychology of like imposter syndrome and all the stupid, pop psych words. But the fact is that Joshua, I think, is really an example of someone who just put aside his whatever, challenges that he was going to face. And he took control of the moment. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that, because that is very intimidating.
I had
that's one of the things God, I'm sorry, that's one of the things God early on said, listen, I'm going to be to you like I was to Moses.
Yeah.
And because I'm going to act to you like I did to Moses, people are going to act the same way. Because the first thing is, it's like taking over from Washington. I mean, John Adams and myself was a great man. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he played a crucial part in the American Revolution. But imagine, you're coming in after the father of the country, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, how intimidating. Or you're coming in after Lincoln. I mean, Blinken or whatever. What was his name?
Definitely not Blinken. Andrew Johnson was after Lincoln.
Yeah. So you talk about. And Joshua rose to the occasion.
I had a mentor very early in my career who told me, he said, you never want to go into a role where everything's working well, because all you can do is screw it up. You want to take over a job where everything is totally messed up, because then you make small improvements and you look like a hero.
That is so
right.
But that's a really good point.
And it's also in life opportunity. Joshua was put into a situation where he had great opportunity to show his courage and leadership. I mean, if he had come in and the battles failed but bad.
Right.
But you know what?
Right.
He was a great man.
This is why every other Jew is named Joshua. So
sure. Josh.
Every other American Jew is named Josh.
All right, so I know we gotta let ChayaLeah get to her other podcast, her other far less important podcast. But oh boy, that's all right.
Yes.
You're doing now?
Thank you. I'm recording now. But thank
you.
I love this, and I'm so. For
great.
me, this is really helpful, because reading through the books and understanding the story, it just puts everything into context. So,
absolutely, for sure.
I hope the listeners are enjoying.
Yeah. So if you want to read along, Judges is next. So go ahead and read that, and we'll let the rabbi recommend how we want to split that up. So
yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.